Okay, in this portion of the video we're going to talk about how to move in and get a medium shot from a wide shot, and then also a close-up. Do you actually zoom in from the wide shot position, or do you actually move the camera closer on the tripod, and how does it look different? So let's start out with the wide shot. The wide shot of Jake writing in front of the post office over here, and it's just a nice wide shot, nothing really too special about it, just a nice even way to start a sequence or a scene by identifying the location. And we're going to go into a medium shot by zooming in from the wide shot. What you notice is that there's kind of a little bit of a squished perspective here. There's not a lot of depth. It's kind of like everything got flattened out a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and show you what it would look like if we instead had moved in with the camera. You can see that there's a lot more perspective now. You can see all the way down the street to that car, that mailbox at the end there. You can see that Jake has become more three-dimensional when you compare and contrast it with the last shot, which was the medium shot. So let's look at the freeze frame here. This is a freeze frame of the wide angle moved in medium shot. This is, we actually walked the camera in closer to Jake and took a medium shot with a wide angle lens. And here's the old shot where we actually just zoomed in from the original wide shot position to a more zoomed telephoto lens rather than a wide angle, and crush the perspective. And here's the wide angle again. So you'll notice that the wide angle has a little bit more depth to it, it has more detail, has more three-dimensionality, as opposed to the zoomed in medium shot, which didn't really have any of those characteristics. Now here's a close-up, and this is a zoomed in close-up from the medium shot angle. And we're going to go ahead and freeze on that for just a second so you can get the hang of the perspective. And then we're going to show you a close-up where we actually moved in closer right there to Jake. And we're going to zoom in from right there. And you're going to notice that you can see the other side of his face because we did not just zoom in from the best perspective for the medium shot. We actually just went to a whole different perspective just for the close-up, which is always the best thing to do. Here's a compare and contrast. Here's the old one. You can kind of see a lot more of the left side of his face than the right side. It's not a three-dimensional type of image. It's kind of flat and, not really lifelike. And here's the new one. You can see a lot more of the other side of his face, the right side of his face. It feels more rounded out, feels more lifelike. So in general, it's always better to move the camera to get the best perspective for medium shot and close-ups from the wide shot. Now this is a tilt down. We're going to do a couple of tilt downs here. I'm showing you some of the raw footage so you can see how the attempts were made. And this is a tilt down to illustrate the pad that he's writing on. Why would you do a tilt down as opposed to just cutting? Because a tilt down is kind of like a moving close-up. So we're moving the close-up from his face down to the pad, and we're just kind of revealing the pad slowly as we tilt down. And it's kind of like a moving close-up. It maintains the audience's attention in that field of view. Now, if we were to select a medium shot to tilt down, watch what would happen. It's just not interesting. There's just something more cinematic and pleasing about a moving close-up, especially in a circumstance where you're filling the frame with his face than filling the frame with the pad. Now that you've seen this particular shot several times, watch this shot. This is the one where we move the camera further to the right so we can get a better perspective on his face and on the pad. You're going to notice that when we move to the right and get a better perspective, we're going to do a couple of freeze frames and show you exactly what kind of a better shot you're going to have of the pad itself. Watch this. This is the old shot of the pad that you've seen several times. It's kind of more flat, less responsive, less lifelike. And then when we go ahead and move to the camera to the right and get a better perspective just for the close-up, you'll notice that it's a lot more lifelike, it's more three-dimensional. It feels more natural, and you can actually see the writing better. It's not just a flat piece of cardboard anymore. Now here's the old shot again. Major difference. I mean, you always want to make sure that when you go for a close-up or go for a medium shot, you want to move the camera into the best position. Don't just zoom in from the wide shot. That's kind of lazy. You want to actually move the camera and get the best perspective for the medium shot and the close-up. Now I want you to concentrate on this freeze frame for a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about composition. This is something that's going to be kind of hard to understand at first, but if you concentrate on it, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. The left side of the frame can always hold more pictorial weight, which means that it can hold a larger object. You have to think of the person here, Jake, as being just an object in the frame. Watch what happens when you flip it over to the right side. Something feels wrong. It just doesn't feel like the right side of the frame can hold that kind of a weight of an object. Watch what happens when you flip it back. Bam. It just feels right. It just feels like the left side of the frame is able to support more. It always comes back to, as a Western culture, our reading eye. We read from left to right, and it always feels right when something is in the left side of the frame and has more mass to it, as opposed to on the right side of the frame, as you can see in this particular shot. So here's what that means for you as a filmmaker. If you want to create a cohesive, unified and natural, normal, just peaceful frame, you want to put your subject on the left side. That's where it's going to support the most amount of mass or weight, pictorial weight. If you want to create uncohesiveness or an unnatural feeling or put the audience at ill at ease, you want to put your subject over to the right side. It just feels wrong. It feels like they're facing in the wrong direction. It's going to add to the tension of the shot and help you create a more tense moment or a tense scene. Okay, from this sequence in the movie, we're going to learn a little bit more about gamma settings and what gamma does to your picture, as well as guiding your actor on the set and guiding their looks and where they're looking and getting them to kind of respond to the script in a very organic way, and also framing. So let's go ahead and start out with the first sequence right here, where he's walking towards an art store and he's looking at some paintings in the movie. And we're going to go ahead and discuss different ways of framing to get the best kind of depth and doing handheld shots. These are all handheld shots, and you'll notice on this shot it's pretty stable, and the reason it's stable is because I'm just leaning against the wooden frame of that particular store. And this shot's pretty nice. It's got a lot of twinkling lights in the background. We're going to look at an alternate shot that doesn't have that and to look and see if it's more interesting or less interesting. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the first shot that I did at that art store. And it seems really, really dark, but it's kind of, I liked it. It was kind of moody. All the skin tones are extremely dark, but I was able to use it for just a very brief amount of time. I really liked the way that that looked. There's nothing in the rulebook that says that every shot has to have pure white in the frame and has to be 100% exposed when you're using it for effect. Now listen to when I asked Jake over here to recount exactly what he's supposed to be feeling when he looks at these paintings. And what are you thinking about when you're doing this?
Success. Right now I'm a poor, struggling writer. I barely have a pot to I don't even have a car. I gotta ride my bike to a job. And all these beautiful landscapes with houses and whatnot. Someday.
So there's no such thing as just telling an actor to look at point A, point B, point C, point D without some kind of an emotion behind every single look that he's doing. There's no such thing because it's going to look flat. It's going to look pretty much completely uninteresting and fake when they do it like that. You got to give your actor some kind of a background for every single shot that you do. Some kind of a way for him to establish an emotional connection with the scene and base his emotional faculties on that particular background. So essentially I told him what to do in this circumstance as what he's feeling. He's feeling that, you know, every single painting has some kind of a beautiful house in it, some kind of a beautiful landscape, and he yearns for that. You know, he wants to succeed as a writer. He wants to be able to own his own home. He wants to be able to make it in the world. I mean, the character of Jake is not stupid. You know, he wants to make it, monetarily, not just as a writer. He wants to succeed in many different ways and not just in becoming a good writer. He doesn't want to be a poverty-stricken poor writer sitting at home. He wants to be a good writer, and he wants to make a financial gain off of it. So when he sees these paintings and, he admires what's inside them, I wanted him to feel that and actually show it in his eyes. And so that's why I told him the background for these paintings. So after I gave him the background, I gave him exactly where he's supposed to look so that his eyes end up close to the camera. Point A to point B, point C, and then finally point D. And the reason I gave him that sequence is, like I said, I wanted his eyes to end up towards the camera at the very end. So I gave him the background for the shot, I gave him the sequence of looks, and then I gave him the final ending point and the beats. Beats being exactly how long he's supposed to hang at each particular painting before we're moving on to the next painting. And the end point of this whole thing is that you don't even need to really show the paintings anymore. You kind of know what the guy's feeling just by looking in his eyes. You can kind of tell what's going on inside that head without actually seeing what he's looking at. Now here's another shot where he walks up to the stores. That's the entrance shot into the scene. And I want you to look at this particular shot and how kind of like flat and dull it is. Let's concentrate on the freeze frame here for a second. And then we're going to look at an alternate shot where we shot it in a slightly different way. Just by adjusting his blocking, we were able to get the camera a little bit to the right and him further to the left. And then watch this. We get all those nice highlights in the background of the street lights and the cars and a person walking up the street, a pedestrian, which just makes the whole scene just so much more lively and realistic. We did a freeze frame here so you can see exactly what it's like just by adjusting his blocking. We didn't really do anything else. Same zoom and everything. And here's the old shot. So you can really see a striking difference just by adjusting the blocking of your actor and kind of being conscious of the background at all times. You can end up going from this frame over to this frame, which is just so much better. Now here's a shot where he's walking up to the store. So we're going backwards here. I did all the close-ups first, and then I did the medium shot. Now I did the walk-up, which is the opening wide shot. And I wanted to get done with this thing quickly. So I had him walk up in a wide shot like that to illustrate the location. Then I zoomed into a medium shot for the actual exit from the frame. When I knew that his eyes were at the final position and he was ready to go, I had him walk out of the frame in a medium shot. That allowed me to enter the scene in a wide shot and exit the scene in a medium shot, but still with good continuity of the fact of where his eyes were looking, and kind of save time and instead of having to go back and redo the whole thing as a medium shot. Now here's the shot where it's the reverse angle of him walking up to the stores. See that I allowed him to walk into the frame and I'm on the correct side of his eye line. I'm always on his right side of his body. And when I switched to the other angle, I was on the correct side of the eye line the entire time, never went to the other side of the eye line. I was always closer to the store than he was. And that's really important. It's really important to stay on the correct side of the eye line because it just makes for better cutting in post, and you'll see that later on. Now in this particular shot, I'm showing you the bad white balance. This is the incorrect white balance that you would want to have for this particular shot. Everything is really orange. Nothing feels neutral or normal. This would be the correct white balance that you would want to have for this particular shot. It is at tungsten 3200 degrees Kelvin instead of the daylight balance, which was the first white balance. And this is a lot more correct because it feels right. And under these particular lighting conditions, that's the light, the street light's actually making that kind of light. It's a sodium vapor lamp, and you're able to get better results when you're shooting under sodium vapor lamps by shooting at a tungsten white balance rather than a daylight white balance. Now here's a shot where I was having him walk up, kind of throw away some garbage, and then walk right past the camera. He walks within inches of the camera. It didn't feel like it was right for him to really kind of bounce off so far to the right without some kind of a light gag. We did a light gag where we turned on the headlights of this particular vehicle to make it feel like he has some kind of a reason to go all the way to the right side of the frame and get out of the car's way and then pass really close to the camera. It also illuminated his face. Now here's what happens when you just have it on the whole time. It doesn't really, have any kind of a dynamic quality to it. There's no reason for him to do that. It just feels like it's a light, but it doesn't feel like it's as organic as when you have someone, moving to the right to avoid a vehicle coming at them, and at the same time illuminating their face. Now here's also some different white balances that we did. Being that this light up here is a mercury vapor lamp and not a sodium vapor, we used a daylight white balance for this shot, and that's why all the other lamps around it seem orange. And I also want to draw your attention to my shadow right there on the left side. That's the camera shadow, and that's why I was not able to use this shot in the movie. Back when I was shooting, I did not notice my camera shadow. And that's something you always want to be aware of as much as possible. Now this is the wrong white balance. This is at tungsten 3200 degrees Kelvin white balance, which is wrong for this mercury vapor lamp. It seems greenish blue, and that is obviously not where you want it. Even though the other lamps now seem correct, they don't seem orange anymore. But this is not the correct white balance for these lamps. Just goes to show you that on all these street lamps, they're as varied as there are stars under the sky. Depending on the manufacturer and depending on the type of bulb that they're using, depending on the how long it's been on, depending on whether it's getting good power or not, the white balance can vary dramatically from one to the next. And whenever you can add your own lighting to the shot, like we did in all the shots outside the bar where we used the light panels, the more you're going to end up with a much more positive frame that you can use later on in the movie. And the less you add your own lighting, the more you're going to be at the mercy of these street lights. But the least that you can do, the most important thing and the least that you can do is at least to get the correct white balance so that there's no cast on the frame, so it doesn't look too green or too orange or anything like that, but to try to get them to be as white as possible and that way you can get the best footage for use in post. Okay, we're going to learn a couple of things from this library scene. Primarily the importance of rehearsal, especially before you walk into a scene where you're kind of stealing a shot like this and you're not really supposed to be there. And the other thing is perspective. We're going to learn a little bit about perspective and the importance of selecting the proper angle, even when you're doing handheld and you're stealing a shot. The importance of actually, getting the proper angle on a scene and how it affects the perception of the scene. So here's the scene that we did. We did the actual medium shot of Jake, and we did the reverse angle of Rachel, and she starts stacking the books in front of him, pretty much all the research that he's going to have to do about writing, and her reverse angle again, and his close-up. And now we're going to watch the rehearsal that went on the street outside the bookstore before we actually walked in to shoot this particular scene. So what we're going to do is we're rehearsing essentially before we walk into the bookstore exactly how we're going to do this thing. So what I want you to do is you're going to be like, you're going to have a book inside your hand, like you're reading, and every once in a while you're going to look up, actually up like above my head, above camera right up here, and with your whole face. Yeah, there you go. And then look back into the book, just keep reading or whatever. Just track with your finger, make sure you track with your finger. And then at a certain point you're going to come in with the book, and that's supposed to be the book right there, and you're going to start stacking them in front of him, okay? So let's practice that. Okay, so I'm going to put the camera right here. Go ahead and start stacking them right in front of the camera. Okay, and yeah, so and there you go. And David, you start looking at the books, and then at her, and then at the books again, and then at her, and then we grab the close-ups. Of both the close-ups here. So we grab the close-ups from over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're doing a lot of reading.
And then the close-ups.
Reading.
Okay.
And then we take one more from over here, where you are actually reading, and then he asks you, just go ahead and take a seat. And then every once in a while he's going to talk to you, and you just have a conversation together. Okay, so we got the gist of the importance of the rehearsal, because when you walk into a set like this and you're not really supposed to be there, you only have a few minutes to kind of get what you need and get out of there before somebody kicks you out. And the importance of having everything ready to go before you walk in is what makes this thing feasible, so that you can actually have a salvageable shot that you can use later on in post. So here's the medium shot that we got of the book stacking. And of course everybody knew their exact action. And if you compare it right back to the rehearsal, you'll see that we did it exactly the right way, exactly the same way as we talked about it. Of course we used the book purse instead of the books. But you get to kind of use whatever is available to you. If you don't have the actual props that you're going to have inside the set, you use whatever is available. You'll see that this is exactly the same shot. Everything's framed exactly the same way. Everybody did their action exactly right because we rehearsed. We rehearsed this thing 2 or 3 times. We walked in, we did it the first time, we walked right back out. None was the wiser. And coming up is the crime scene. Now, the crime scene was pretty important in the story because it was part of Jake's dream sequence. And the dream sequence is also pretty important because that's what prompted him to get back into writing. So here's our actor, Jonathan, who's actually a real LAPD cop. And here's one of our actresses, Tatiana, and she's collecting a sample of actually chocolate syrup and water. That's what that blood is right there. We got him a little bit of a fake pistol there to use. We didn't want to use any real guns on the set, which always helps to have a fake pistol on the set that is registered to be used for this type of filming. And also, I'm pretty sure that in most states and in most counties, you have to have a police officer on the set in order to be able to have any kind of a weapon, whether it be a false or real weapon on the set, or an armorer, which is a person who's registered to use these weapons and gives the weapon to the particular actor for just that one scene. And we got them into correct position of where we're going to be. We put up the police tape back there and got his car position as to pretty much where it's going to be when he parks it before he comes out and comes over to the scene. And we did a little Macbeth color checker chart to make sure that we had the proper colors. And then we started with our first take on our first angle. And there comes the car in the background. That's Jonathan's car. And he's going to drive it right up to the police tape. And the first time he did it, he drove the car and nosed it into the right. And on the subsequent take, I asked him to nose it to the left so that when he comes out of the car, I can see him better. And we also noticed that on this particular angle, the first thing that we did is that we always see is really Tatiana's back. We don't see him walking up. It's a bad shot. There's no tension being built. There's no action. There's nothing interesting really in the frame at all. So we did one more, and you can see me signaling up there on the left side to Jonathan to bring his car over, where we went to a slightly lower angle to kind of make the police officers larger than life. And we also adjusted the blocking so that we can see Jonathan walking up to Tatiana, and we had him put a CB radio in his hand as though essentially he's radioing back to headquarters about what's going on. Okay, so let's take a moment to talk about form. The form that their bodies are making with this particular type of blocking right here is called an upright triangle, which is actually a very powerful form that we've talked about before. They are framed on the left with the building and on the right with that truck, and they're being allowed to stand out against the sky in an upright triangle, as I've shown you. Now, we've talked about the upright triangle being a symbol of authority, a symbol of power, and essentially when she gets up, she takes away the attention of that power from him. When he was walking up, he had the power in the scene. He was the controlling dominant figure in the scene. She stands up, she takes the control of the scene away as she stands up, because she ends up taking the apex of the triangle. Also, she's in motion, and any object that is in motion and occupying a greater part of the frame, which means he's in motion, but she's also in motion and she's taking up more of the frame, is going to end up taking the attention away from the other object that our eyes had been fixed on for a while now. So even though our eyes were fixed on Jonathan walking up, when she stands up, she's the larger object in the frame. She's going to take the attention of the audience away with her, away from him. However, when the blocking changes and she moves further down to the right, the shape that is created in the frame is that of a rectangle, and it is perfectly centered in the frame, and their positions are right along the law of thirds, which means that they're perfectly balanced. So it creates a perfectly balanced frame with no particular person taking the dominance in the form, in the shape on the screen. However, what that allows us to do is to work with eye lines at this point and lighting. So the eye line that is created in this shot goes from the brightest lit face on the screen, the brightest lit human face on the screen, then to any other human face on the screen, then to the brightest white object in the frame that is closest to the center, then to the brightest lit object, period. So the audience will shift their look from Jonathan's face over to Tatiana, who's the other human being in the set, and then to the police evidence bag sticker, which is the white object that is closest to the center of the frame, and then over to that truck on the right, which is the brightest lit object in the frame that is not centered and not a person. And notice that the lower angle is really working for us here. It is pretty much isolated the police officers against the sky, which is a lot better than the last shot, where they were kind of mostly being combined with the background and the cars that are down there. This really kind of isolated them, separated them into the sky. But the only thing that we noticed is that when we were shooting subsequent shots after this, we had lost the sunlight because we were shooting this right around sunset. So we figured we needed to go back and get another wide shot, another establishing shot of the action. This is the original wide shot that had a lot of sunlight in it, but it was actually at a higher angle. And we scrapped that and shot another one at a lower angle, but it still had a lot of sunlight on it. Now see if this cuts with his shot. It does in this particular situation. However, when we go to the following shot, it will not cut anymore. So if we chose to use that particular take and not the one before, we would not be able to use that wide shot or this take. So let's go back to this wide shot again, the sunlit wide shot from a lower angle. And let's try to go ahead and cut to his shot, that's fine. We can cut to that particular sunlit shot. And let's use her shot. It will not cut. She has a little bit of light on the right side of her hair, but it's not enough to duplicate the same type of effect as his light. And this shot right here, the reverse angle, the total reverse angle, does not feel like it's the same shot at all. But if you go to this shot, which we shot in an overcast situation, that will cut with this shot, and it will cut with this shot, because it's now the same lighting condition for both shots. And it will also cut with this shot. They all cut together now. This is a very cohesive sequence now. We can actually use all those shots. Now the next thing we got was a close-up on Tatiana, and we stayed on, of course, the correct side of the eye line. If we had crossed over that side to her right side, then we would have been on the incorrect side of the eye line, but we stayed on her left side, which meant we were on the correct side of the eye line, so that when she's on the right side, she's looking to her left. Notice how he's on the left side of the frame there, looking to the right side of the frame. She's on the right side of the frame, looking towards the left side of the frame. And if we go to the reverse angle, now she just switched positions. She's on the left side and he's on the right side. That's why it won't cut. You need to go back, and he's on the left side looking to the right. She's on the right side looking to the left. When we cut to the reverse angle, she's still on the right side looking to the left. He's still on the left looking to the right. It will cut. So always maintain your eye line. Always maintain your eye line. Know where your eye line is. Keep the people on the correct actual sides of the frame that they belong. After we finished all the main shots for the crime scene, we went back and started getting some cut-ins. And the cut-ins is like this shot right here where Jonathan's getting out of his car, and we could use it later on in post to kind of synchronize the entire sequence and to pace it better. And let's see this one shot right here. He actually gets out of his car. Well, he bumps his head and he bumps his shoulder, so we couldn't use that anyhow. And he walks out the right side of the frame. And see how that cuts with the other original establishing wide shot. It cuts, but only barely, only because I cut on a motion where he's actually lifting up the police tape. And if I didn't cut on that particular motion, watch this. This time I'm just going to go ahead and let him just put on his coat and cut with the coat. And see what happened. Your eye goes from the right side of the frame, jumps to the left side of the frame. Watch it again. Just concentrate on his face, which is where everybody's usually looking, and then it just jumps to the left side. Now, however, go ahead and concentrate on this particular one right here, where he's already starting on the left side, and he goes and stays on the left side. So it's much easier on the eye. Let's watch it again. So when you're blocking your actors from the wide shot to the medium shot, try to make sure that they stay in the same sector of the frame. Otherwise, you're going to end up with something of a jump cut in the eye line. So the next scene that we did is with David reaching out into his dream sequence, his dream scene, where he's looking at the detectives as part of his dream sequence and reaching out. And that's where we left him off on the couch, and then we cut directly into the scene. And he's watching the two detectives at the crime scene. And we shot the wide shot first, and then the medium shot, and then the reverse angle. And notice that he's moving his head in the exact same direction every single time as when he was back at the apartment on the couch. And also notice that it is a static shot, not a moving shot. We don't pan or tilt or anything like that, because it makes it a lot easier for us to cut it with the post-production. In post-production with the shot that we did on the couch. Also notice it's about the same perspective, pretty much about the same height, especially when we get to the medium shot right there. That's about exactly the same height as the couch. And notice also that his action, when he's panting, his chest and his upper body is rising and falling, so that his action matches what he did back in the apartment on the couch. And everything looks exactly the same. Notice he's also turning his head all the way, just like he did back at the apartment. So everything is exactly matched. So when we cut to it from the apartment scene, it's going to seem like it's a good cut. Also notice the detectives blocking. They're not in front of his face. They're not being blocked by him. They're off to the right. They're off in the right third of the screen, properly composed. Everything is properly composed. You see just enough of the sky, just enough of the ground. You get a sense of the place. You know exactly where it is. But at the same time, you know, everything is going to cut perfectly with what we shot back at the couch. And then, of course, we have the reverse angle. And because we were directly behind his head, and now we're directly in front of him, he was centered before and now he's centered again, then we don't have to be off to either side of him. This is going to match also exactly with the shot of him on the couch, as long as he's looking in the exact same direction as he was on the reverse angle. So when we're in the wide shot, when he looks off to the left, he's supposed to actually look off to the right here. When he's looking off to the right, then now he's supposed to look off to the left. Luckily, we got a big variety of shots, but the one time when he stares off to the left side, when he's staring at the detectives, that's when we're actually supposed to be 100% dead on as far as where he's looking, matching that with a wide shot. And notice how I'm also lighting him with the light panel to fill in his eye sockets and his face in that light that we had over there, which is kind of like very unflattering light. It's kind of like nothing but skylight. Everything's even, all exactly the same. So you kind of have to bring up your actor's face a little bit to kind of separate him from the background a little bit. So now let's talk about group eye lines. Let's say if you have a group of people, 3 people, and you want to make sure to match eye lines between them when you're cutting back and forth, here's how you're going to do it. This is the scene that we shot where supposedly Jake is directing these actors in his own movie. So it's kind of like a movie within a movie at this point. So he was kind of seeing into the future when he was part of the dream sequence as far as the detectives, of him actually directing these actors in the future in part of his own movie. So we're going to use some freeze frames, and we're going to look at the eye lines that we used here in this sequence to make sure that we understand that when we walk into a situation where we have 3 people talking to each other, we know which side of their shoulders to put the camera on in order to make sure that that we have eye lines that will cut back and forth between different people in that group. So let's start with the first one. Now, when we look at a scene like this from up above, we have person A on the left, person B at the top, and person C on the right. And when we want to establish the eye lines between them, there are 3 separate eye lines. The eye line between person A and B, B and C, and A and C. Each one of them is a separate eye line altogether. So, if we wanted to have a conversation between person A and person C, and we have a close-up or an over-the-shoulder favoring person A, we have to put it over person C's left shoulder, as in the situation. So in order for us to get the best angle on Jonathan right there, we have to put it over Jake's left shoulder. In order for us to get a close-up or an over-the-shoulder favoring person C, we have to put it over person A's right shoulder because we're staying on one side of the eye line. So there's the shot of the over-the-shoulder favoring Jake over Jonathan's right shoulder. Now, we could have still done it on the other shoulder as if we had established them starting on that shoulder, but because we started on this side, on the bottom side of the frame here, or essentially on the left side of Jake, on the right side of Jonathan, we have to stay on that side for the entire time when they're having a conversation. Now, when the conversation shifts to Jake talking to Tatiana, person C to person B, we have to stay on Jake's left shoulder. So here's the shot. This is a shot, an over-the-shoulder favoring Tatiana over Jake's left shoulder. So we stayed on the correct side of the line. If she wants to have a conversation with person A, we were going to start on her left shoulder and over Jonathan's right shoulder. That's what the shot's going to look like. She's going to be in the right side of the frame. He's actually in the middle right now, but he could have been more on the left. It doesn't matter. As long as the proportion or the way that they're organized is correct. She's on the right, he's in the left. Don't forget, we made a creative choice to stay on a certain side of the eye line. You don't have to stay on, person C's left shoulder, person A's right shoulder. It doesn't have to be that way. You can choose to be on the other side if you wanted to. That's fine. As long as you stay on that side the entire time when those 2 people are having a conversation, then you're fine. But it's also a lot easier when you're organizing people in a triangle like this, in a triangle configuration, to stay on the more shallow end of the triangle, which is the bottom end of the triangle, and let the apex go away from the camera. Now we're going to talk about another scene, and we're going to show you how to do proper cutaways, and we're going to talk about composition and some gamma settings for your HVX300 or DVX100B. This is at a Los Angeles park that we have over here. And it's a really nice location because there's a lot of nature, as you can see. You can do some really nice kind of romantic settings over there. And we're going to start out, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about gamma settings. So here we are in a nice outdoor type situation. There's a lot of green grass, white, and skin tones for us to judge what we're looking at. This is Cine D Cinematrix. Notice that the skin tones aren't very saturated and the gamma response is pretty flat and gray. What that means is that you have a safer gamma to work with in post-production. It means that the darker grays are not going to go too dark and the lighter grays aren't going to go too white. You'll be able to pull them down, pull them up in post, and actually control them in the color correction phase without too much trouble. Then we switch to Cine V Gamma Cinematrix, and we notice a lot more contrast. The actors just kind of pop out of the frame, the whites become whiter, the grass becomes greener, and their skin tones get a little bit more saturated. We've talked about this many times before in indoor situations that Cine like V is definitely the most realistic, most broad tone, broad dynamic range setting that you can use on the HVX 300 and the 100B. Even if you don't own these cameras, you can still learn a lot from just kind of seeing all the differences in the gamma and the matrix that you can accomplish if you're able to control the gamma or the matrix settings either in the camera or in post-production. So here we switch to Cine like D normal matrix. Notice that the curve went back down to being a flat grayish curve. All that really kind of deep contrast went away from the Cine like V. And we also lost a lot of that saturation that we had in the Cine like matrix. Cine like matrix on the HVX 300 and the 100B is always going to give you a more expanded color palette to work with. It's going to give you brighter, more natural colors. So whenever you're shooting anything where you want it to look film-like, you want to kind of always use Cine like matrix. If you don't want to shoot safe, use Cine like V gamma. If you want to shoot safe, use Cine like D gamma. Switching back to Cine like V gamma normal matrix, you'll notice when you go back, if you want to rewind and compare it to the Cine like V Cinematrix, that it has the same contrast range, the same dynamic range from dark to light. Everybody's more contrasty, the shadows are a little bit darker, the skin tones are a little bit brighter. However, it's not quite as saturated. So if you want something that's not quite as saturated, but you want it to have broad, really nice kind of contrast, you want to go with the Cine like V normal matrix. When you want to go with something that boosts just the red part of the frame, if you have anything that's red in the frame and you want to just boost that, you want to go with the fluoromatrix. This is Cine like D gamma fluoromatrix, so you went back to being a more of a grayish dynamic range. If you go to Cine like V gamma fluoromatrix, you'll notice you get all the dynamic range of the Cine like V setting gamma. However, you're only popping the reds with the fluoromatrix. It's a little bit more saturated than normal matrix, but not quite as saturated as the Cine like matrix. So you have quite a few different settings and different choices and palettes with the HVX 300 and 100B. And also, like I said, even if you don't own these cameras, you can look at this footage and you can kind of learn what you want to, go for in post-production or with your particular camera if you have an adjustable gamma or adjustable color choices. Now we're going to talk a little bit about lines that disappear into the distance. Notice how when they're walking down this path, the path splits and it goes to the right. But also as they walk past it, you'll notice that it has behind them curved to the right. Whenever you have a line or a path that in the frame, in the shot, will go off and curve to the left or to the right, it takes the audience's eye into the distance and it creates a much more pleasing, more natural, deep kind of frame that feels comfortable. If you don't have those kind of lines in the background, you create the exact opposite of that. So if you want to create harmony, if you want to create a pleasing, more natural frame, and you want to try to make a setting like this appear even more harmonious and more natural, make sure that there's some kind of a line in the shot that takes the audience's eye from the camera all the way into the distance in a curving line. Curving lines always have a much more pleasing, natural approach to calm the audience rather than hard diagonal lines like we've seen before when Jake was walking by himself. Now this other shot right here, we were trying to get a shot where we wanted to be able to get the palm trees in the shot, but of course they're obviously so much taller than the people, and as you can see when we tilt up, it doesn't quite work out too well. So going to a lower angle on the tripod, which is waist level right now, and having the performers walk up to the camera with the palm trees in the background in a medium shot really kind of made the frame a lot more cohesive. I was able to get the palm trees in a shot, which I wanted to get that wind kind of blowing through the palm trees and them swaying from left to right, and I was able to get a medium shot on the performers at the same time without cutting. It's all in one frame. Now we're going to talk about what to favor when you're trying to shoot a scene where you're trying to either draw attention to the performers or to the background. So if I'm trying to get a wide shot where I'm trying to draw attention to the performers themselves and I'm trying to make the background just kind of as window dressing behind them, just to kind of create an ambiance around the frame, but they're the dominant parts of the frame, I would always have them face towards the camera and I would frame them up using the law of thirds, and I would essentially try to get their faces, of course, above the midpoint of the frame, preferably closer to the top third as I have it right here. Those are your sweet spots. The top left third and the top right third are your sweet spots where you want to have the faces of your performers in a wide shot like this. And this way they dominate the frame, they become the focal point of the frame, and the background just becomes a setting to create ambiance for them. And again, none of these principles are set in stone. They're just established principles, but that doesn't mean you have to use them every single time. In fact, that's kind of boring. So when we cut to the close-up over here, I'm just going to go ahead and center them up. I think that's just more personal, it's more private, more harmonious to the audience. It just feels right. I wouldn't want to set them off to the left or to the right side at this point when I go in for the close-up. And also I want you to know that the law of thirds and thinking in form and lines and shapes, those will just come naturally to you after a while. You don't have to always think that you have to always think about those kind of things. It's just at first. When you first get started, you have to think about all these things, and give it about a year or so, and pretty soon you'll find out that if you keep trying your hand at cinematography, and if you keep thinking along those lines and along those forms and shapes, eventually it's just going to become second nature for you. So you don't really have to worry about it for the rest of your life. It just eventually will become second nature. You'll see a scene where you feel that you want to evoke a certain emotion, and before you know it, you've framed up your actors, you've got everybody in the right situation so that it actually evokes that emotion without it ever reaching the conscious level of your thinking. It all becomes an unconscious, subliminal kind of workings of your brain, where you just put your performance in a certain way, you put your camera in a certain position, you light everybody in a certain way, you shoot it, you're done in a few minutes, you never even entered the conscious level of thinking. So here's that same scene by the pond where I wanted to draw attention to the setting instead of the performers. So what I did in this particular case is I gave you several different configurations of the exact same shot. Here's one where they're centered in the frame. Now here's one where I pan off to the left side and they become off to the right hand side of the frame. Even though they're composed along the line of thirds at this point, it doesn't feel right because they have no face room, they have no look space to the right side. They're supposed to be looking off to the right side, and they have no place to look off the right side. So if you pan over to the right side and put them along the left side of the frame, the left line of third instead of the right line of third, they have room to look off to the right side because their bodies are facing towards the right side. And also notice that that particular beam that they're sitting on right there bends forward and then off to the right again, and it makes a really nice frame along the bottom line of thirds that otherwise you'd end up missing. And always when you're in a natural setting like this, it gives you a lot of opportunities to get cutaways. Make sure you get your cutaways in order to pace your editing later on in post-production, because otherwise you're going to have to go back to the location if you need a cutaway. It's easier when you're there, just go ahead and swing the camera off, get some cutaways, and be done with it completely. One thing that you can also do is when you're editing in post-production, you can either start with the cutaway to establish the location and then go to the master shot, whereas the convention is to always start with the master shot and then go to the cutaway. It's up to you, it's a creative choice, but if you start with a master shot, make sure that the cutaway that you're going to cut to, just to say for instance in this case the ducks, they're actually in the frame somewhere, so that when you cut to them it doesn't feel like you're cutting to something that doesn't exist as part of the setting. Want to make sure to establish the fact that there are, let's just say, ducks in the wide shot, and then when you cut to that cutaway of that particular action by itself, you had already established the presence of that action as part of the frame. Now let's talk about depth of field. We're going to talk about how far away do you have to position actors from each other in order to get them to not be in the same plane of focus. Now notice that what we're doing is we're going to have them walk along the z-axis. So the z-axis, of course, the axis that leads the actor or the performer away from the camera and towards the camera. So in order to separate actors along the z-axis, you have to have them sufficiently isolated from each other so that you can have a different focus for one than for the other that is so different that the other one's going to go out of focus. This is for your lens and your camera. Every camera, every lens is different. And when we actually get started, we will have the lens at maximum telephoto. And we also had the iris at f5.6 for this particular test, which is kind of like a good nominal type of aperture to have. So what Jake's going to do is he's going to take a few steps forward, and eventually we're going to do freeze frames to show you exactly what he looks like at each particular position that he stops at and how far he is out of focus from Rachel. And remember, every time he walks forward, he's separating himself from her along the z-axis into a whole different plane of focus. So let's go ahead and get started. At 55 feet, they are at f5.6, well in focus with each other, of course. They're standing side by side, and the tree is completely out of focus. When he steps forward to 45 feet, so there's 10 feet in between them right now, they're still pretty much in focus with each other. The tree is still way out of focus. At 27 feet, we're starting to see her go out of focus. So he is 27 feet away from the camera. He is about 25 feet away from her. When he steps forward to 20 feet away from the camera, he's going to be about 35 feet away from her. She's very much well out of focus. So this would be characterized as being two completely different planes at this point. When he steps forward to 9 feet, he's almost at about the same plane of focus as the tree, and she is completely out of focus, completely blurred in the background because there's over 45 feet between them. So if you wanted to get that kind of an effect, where you wanted to rack focus from him to her, and you wanted her to be that out of focus before you rack focus to her, you would have to have approximately 45 feet distance between these particular actors with this particular circumstance, with this camera and this lens at this aperture setting. So this was only done for one particular reason, to prove to you that you can have people 8 feet apart and be able to separate them in a different plane of focus by using the z-axis. It's impossible. You got to have them 20, 30 feet apart sometimes to be able to achieve effects like this in the actual camera. Now, what does that allow you to do? The emotional impact of having actors that far apart and being able to rack focus from one person to the next is as a reveal. Just like when you pan over or tilt over to reveal a new actor who just entered the frame or is on the right side or the left side, it's the same kind of a thing. You are revealing new information or new characters to the audience by way of a change in the z-axis plane of focus. So you're changing your focus from him to her, revealing her standing behind him. You can use that to further the story, introduce new characters, introduce new action, or create emotional impact on the audience.